to then look forward.
You speak of the neglect of the last administration, the Bush administration, and within the last couple of years, you've injected yourself in a more high-profile way into American politics. You came out in support of Barack Obama in late 2007, and last year you produced the introductory film to what ended up being Ted Kennedy's last appearance at a political convention, the Democratic Convention. Did you feel the need, as you worked on this series, to become more politically involved?
No, not at all. And nothing in our film is political. Nothing in any of the films that I've made have been political. In fact, I had planned to sit out the previous election because I had just made this film on the war, and I was decidedly wanted to avoid it. But I saw in Barack Obama something I hadn't seen in a long while in American history, something of the caliber of a Lincoln, something of the caliber of an FDR. And I was really drawn to that. And I feel that we've become so dialectically preoccupied in our country. Everything's red state, blue state, you know, up, down, black, white, male, female, that we have forgotten to select for the thing that's going to survive, allow us to survive. The historian Arthur Schlesinger said there's too much pluribus and not enough unum. All my work has been about unum, and I thought that he represented, and I still think that he represents that. Kennedy has been an acquaintance I've known for a long time, and I'd hoped to do the film anonymously. We didn't charge any money, no one hired me. It was essentially a favor to somebody that I knew, and it's so sad that it turned out to be his last great public appearance. But it's not a desire to inject myself in politics, but a few times we have to just revert to citizen and say, this I believe. I don't put that in any of the films.
So you're not going to be making any Michael Moore type of documentaries?
No, baseball hat looks terrible on my head, and I'm too skinny to do that.
And you still have the great hair. You don't want to cover that up. Let's go back to your student days at Hampshire College. Did you know back then, in the 70s, that this is what you were going to become? This is what you were going to do?
A couple of years after my mom died, my father, who had a strict curfew, let me stay up late and watch movies. It was very bizarre. It could sometimes 2 a.m. on a school night. And I watched my dad break down and cry. He hadn't cried at my mom's funeral, but he cried there. And I suddenly realized he's crying for her. And I was so impressed with the power. I vowed right then I was going to be a filmmaker. But I thought it would be John Ford or Alfred Hitchcock, a feature filmmaker, Hollywood. And I went to Hampshire College in Amherst, Massachusetts, a new experimental school that opened in the fall of '70. I went in the fall of '71. And all of my teachers in film and photography were social documentary still photographers. They were interested in the truth of what is and what was, much more than anything the human imagination could think of. And they were right. I mean, for me, they were right. And I suddenly wedded this with a completely untrained but clearly passionate interest in my country. You know, I'm really curious about how my country ticks. And all of a sudden, I was one of those fortunate people that by the time they were graduating from college, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. However, choosing to be a documentary filmmaker focusing in American history on PBS, it was like taking a vow of anonymity and poverty. So I immediately moved to rural New Hampshire. I mean, just about as rural as you can get, where I felt I could live sort of off the grid for nothing. And I'm very happy to say that the anonymity and the poverty didn't happen, but the second best decision after moving to New Hampshire was staying there. And so I've been able to sort of hand make with a group of people that are not only my coworkers, but my friends and people I love, the films that we've been able to make over the last 30 plus years.
And so you started with the Brooklyn Bridge, which was probably almost seen out your window in your native Brooklyn.
Well, no, I was born in Brooklyn, and I lived for a little bit in Manhattan, and then I came back later as an adult after college, and I shot the film and then moved up to New Hampshire to edit it. And it was one of those things where I sent it off in the mail, and in the middle of the winter carrying wood in. I couldn't afford oil to heat my home. I was chopping the wood that kept my house warm. I got this message that it had been nominated for an Academy Award, and I was the only person who slipped in the ice that day and, you know, found myself sitting in a snowdrift yelling at the top of my lungs.
And did you think that your days as a hermit were about to end?
Well, you know, I sort of figured that that was a pretty good sign that I'd chosen the right course, that if the first film had sort of hit it out of the park that way. But I think the thing that I understood better than that was that in this little town, any notoriety plus 50 cents got you a cup of coffee. So by staying there and continuing to hand make the films, we didn't take ourselves too seriously. And we are interested in just telling stories. This is a very labor-intensive thing that we do. The Parks is 10 years in the making. Most of these the series are more than 5 years. So it was how you figured out a process to work with other people and bring them out.
But you started with relatively easy subjects because the Brooklyn Bridge and the Statue of Liberty were iconic structures. They were in one place and they have a history. But then when you expand it to the Civil War,
I know,
till you get to epics.
Saying easy is like telling a kid, oh, that bike, everybody can ride a bike. And until you know how to ride a bike. So the Brooklyn Bridge was sort of like learning how to ride a bike. Yeah, we began to bite off a lot of things. And then we've gone back to biographies.
Did you ever feel that you were biting off more than you could chew?
Every single project, and I want to do that. I mean, the worst thing in the world would be to stay still. You know, I mean, people look at these and they say, oh, you're using the same stuff. But you could say that if you walked into a gallery filled with Cézanne paintings, you know? I mean, yeah, it's the same artist, but that's good. You're recognizing a style. But each individual film has the passion of that moment and all the different tools that we use to figure out how to solve the problems of that specific thing. So this film on the parks is, you know, exponentially more complicated than another film, but no less hard ultimately when you get down to the nitty-gritty of how you're going to make it and tell a good story.
Your relationship with PBS goes back to the early 80s. Do you think, not to pat ourselves on the back so much, but do you think that commercial TV or later cable channels would have accepted your documentaries, or have they ever reached out to you to do work?
Oh, they've reached out to me since the success of the Civil War, but the answer, the simple answer, and the emphatic and joyous answer is no. You know, PBS, this much maligned, you know, often by both sides, one foot in the marketplace, the other proudly out, just happens to make, in an environment of 500 channels, which we're all aware, painfully aware that there's almost nothing on, happens to make the best children's, the best science, the best nature, the best arts, the best public affairs, the best history, I'm told, and lots of other stuff, and we do it on a shoestring, and there's no commercial interruptions. I mean, another way to put it is, if you don't like any one of my films, it's all my fault, and that's the way I want it to be. Do you know what I'm saying? I want to be no excuses. And I can go to A-list Hollywood directors and they're complaining about the circumstance of a film that you and I would think, boy, they're so lucky and they did this, but they're still upset because they didn't get the music, they didn't get to use her as an actress, they didn't get to use him as an actor, or this person as a writer. And I'm going, I don't have any complaints. This network has nurtured me and protected me and allowed me to do complicated and sometimes controversial subjects in American history. And there's no other place that I could imagine being.
You don't think that any place else would have allowed the sometimes length of your films to air as well as the way that you wanted them aired?
I think it's partly that, but I wouldn't make too much of it. I spend all of my time trying to make things just the right length, you know, and I've taken big subjects and sometimes they've taken a lot of time. But no, they wouldn't have done it. I started out, the Civil War was going to be 5 1-hours. If I'd been at HBO and I went to them and I said, look, you know, the material's really good, I need 11.5 hours, they would just laugh at me. And the executive at public television said, can I see? And he said, oh, this is great, let's do it. How much more money? And I said, well, I only need 10%. It was an economy of scale. It was just, the story's good. And he goes, yes, it is good. And we put it on and we made history. I mean, that, you can just imagine a mercantile situation that would have said, you know, you can't do this. The marketplace doesn't permit this thing. You can't have that. We don't think we can get the sponsors. But public television doesn't have that worry.
Speaking of making history, the late historian Stephen Ambrose was quoted as saying, you know this quote,
I do.
More Americans get their history from Ken Burns than from any other source. First of all, is that a good thing or a bad thing? And does that put extra pressure on you?
No, I'm much harder on myself than that. It's silly. I love Steve and I miss him so much. He was a dear, dear friend, and that was a very, very nice thing to say. And I don't know if it's true. You know, we've averaged on these things 40 million people of the big series, and that's a large number of people. And that may represent the largest number of folks sort of passionately interested in history when a bestseller is a couple million copies of a history book. But that doesn't really matter. What matters is that we are trying to figure out how this country ticks. Like a mechanic, you're lifting up the hood and saying what works well, what's not working, where did we go right, where did we go wrong, and a kind of vigorous history as the kind that Steve Ambrose practiced, muscular and critical, I'm interested in.
You know, they say that you've made it when you're parodied in popular culture.
Yeah, I guess I've made it.
You've already been parodied on The Simpsons.
Yeah.
And in The Adventures of Jimmy Neutron, Jimmy and his friends watch a 97-hour-long documentary on Egypt made by you.
Yeah, well,
which raises the question, that aside, Have you ever thought of tackling subjects that aren't about America, that's something offshore?
No. I mean, yes, I've entertained it, but it doesn't attract me. It doesn't go to my heart. And it's just because I'm curious. I could spend 1,000 years telling stories in American history and never run out of good stories to tell. I'm just drawn to them. And the parodies are right. You know, they should be. I've got a cartoon over my desk that shows this bleary-eyed couple sitting on a couch watching TV, and the TV's blaring. It says, "Coming soon to PBS, OJ, a 2,750-hour documentary." And the bubble, collective bubble over the couple says, "Ken Burns has to be stopped." You know? And my kids brought that home for me, and I've saved it.
How fast can they make film stock for you? Your next project?
We are halfway through editing an update of our 1994 series on baseball. We're calling it the 10th inning. The previous was 9 episodes. And we're just beginning editing a history of Prohibition, which brings us again and again and again to this magnificent city of Chicago to tell that complicated story of when our government tried to interfere in the most intimate ways with an amendment to the Constitution in our private lives. And, by the way, the only amendment to the Constitution that's been repealed with horrible, you know, unintended consequences as a result of its original passage.
And of course, Chicago has an inglorious history with Prohibition.
Well, a lot of people.
Do you make us look good, or is it?
I think we
kind
make.
of the seedy
I think
side?
we make a Chicago look accurate, which is people, Americans reacting to
Well,
this
that
thing.
answers that question.
Well, it turned half the country into lawbreakers. That's the first thing that this horrific amendment did. Female alcoholism, which was non-existent at the beginning of Prohibition, was a huge social problem when it ended. Go figure. And we left ourselves with a criminal underclass we still can't seem to get rid of.
Baseball will be coming when? The 10th inning?
The fall of 2010.
And
Prohibition in early 2011.
And there's talk that you might tackle Vietnam.
We've already begun to do preliminary spade work in that. We've got a few other projects between that on the Dust Bowl, the Central Park Jogger, and a big series on the Roosevelts. But, you know, I vowed after the Civil War not to do another war. And then I had to do the Second World War. We were losing 1,000 veterans a day. Our kids think we fought with the Germans against the Russians in the Second World War. It had to be done. And so now I can't say no to it. And there's so much. We think that this is a more talkative generation, and perhaps they are, but they still don't talk about what it's like to be in war. And I think it's important to return again and again, because human beings forget the horrible, horrible consequences of war. And as soon as it's done, we wrap it in nice, bloodless, gallant myth, and we forget what transpires. So if you have access to veterans who can say, this is what happens, you know, I saw bad things, I did bad things, I lost good friends. Maybe we just, you know, make sure that the wars we do fight, and there'll be no problem of having wars to fight, are the right wars.
Ken Burns, it's always nice to have you in our studio, and
pleasure.
one of your series on PBS. We look forward to it.
Thank you
Thanks
so
for being
much,
here.
Eddie.
Ken Burns, National Parks, America's Best Idea, airs right here on Channel 11 starting this Sunday, September 27th at 7 p.m. Have a great night.